Good evening, everyone. You're watching Vintage Motocross Q&A, and I'm your host, Joe Abadi. Thank you, Jordan Woodworth, Chelsea, Susie, and everyone that helps put the show together every week. We've got a nice show lined up for you tonight. I'm going to be telling you a little bit more about it as we get down to the starting line. In the next time, try this segment, I'm going to give you a really nice tip on how to get graphics on your seat just like this. In the Moto Showcase, one of the nicest 77 RM 125s I've ever seen. I'm going to tell you a bit more about that. It's coming up. In the Here's the Problem segment, we've got like 5 different questions that came in tonight. One of them is about a rusty frame rail. We're going to be talking about that as well. What's it worth? How about a $12,000 OSA? You're going to be hearing more about that in just a little while from me and Bill Masho. The 522 project continues. Where do you see what we have lined up for you this week? Trivia tonight. You don't want to miss it. Got a question coming up a little bit later on in the show. You'll be able to call in and win the book, Finding Number 49 by Keith Geisner. Share the show, guys. Reach down to your phone, or if you're on your computer, I'd like you to go. Just hit that button. Tell some friends you're watching Vintage Motocross Q&A. Get some people to come down and watch the show. You could also invite people to the page during the week if you can. Every little bit helps. We've got the YouTube channel as well. Jordan's got a slide for that. So if you can, subscribe to our YouTube channel. You'll be able to watch all the episodes of Vintage Motocross Q&A at any time. They're in HD. You can watch them on your television. There's also a little bell thing you could add to your subscription. It'll tell you when the show's coming on. So get over there to YouTube anytime you can. It's growing, and it's really, really good. But we could always use some more subscribers to the YouTube channel. I want to thank our sponsors, Preston Petty Products, Vintco, Amsoil, and I want to welcome, of course, Nightmare Racing. We told you about that last week. Nightmare Racing, Mark Hildebrand, the nicest, the best Kawasaki plastic ever made anywhere. And I'm going to be telling you a little bit more about Full Circle Racing. Tom McAllister has agreed to be a sponsor of our show as well. We'll talk about Full Circle Racing a little bit later on in the show. And the next time, try this segment. As I told you a little bit before, I'm going to tell you about how to put on a stencil on a seat, how to make it nice and straight, look professional. I had to do this one on location. A friend called me up, asked me to help him out. Jordan, let's see what the video looks like. First thing you want to do when mounting this stencil on the back of your seat is make sure that this area is clean. The way you can do that is with some regular alcohol and a paper towel. This will remove any grease, grime, dirt, anything that might impede that little stencil sticking to the back of the seat. Once you get it all cleaned up like that, it dries pretty quickly. You can then begin to sort of eyeball where your stencil is going to go. You want to have it as close to the center as possible. Remember to take a look at the corners too, because your stencil might have a covering over it that's a little bit bigger. Don't forget where it says, in this case, Kawasaki, that's going to be where it's sitting on the seat. This stencil is cut very squarely, very nicely, so we're going to put it about right there. I want to peel it away, nice and gently. Be careful because, like on the A, there's a little white piece in the middle. You want to make sure you get that on your seat. So, put it right in the middle, just like that. That looks very straight. Now you're going to peel away the paper that's on the top, and here's where you have to be careful. Again, like with the A's in the Kawasaki, there's that little part of the stencil in there. You don't want to lose that when you peel away this part of the stencil. All right, that one stuck really well. That one stayed on too. And the last one, that one stayed in there too. So, your stencil is on there. It's nice and square, good and straight. Your next step, of course, is to mask off the area. You don't want to get any of the spray dye on. And it'd be a good time to mention it. I use this Duplicolor vinyl and fabric. This is a coating that's special for leather and plastic. It's not quite like paint, but it's very dusty when you use it. In other words, when you spray regular spray paint, you get some overspray. This is extra dusty. So you want to make sure you mask off your seat so that you don't get any of that overspray anywhere on there. It's a little windy out here, but let it dry. This is why I recommend putting at least 2 or 3 layers of tape. Depends if it's humid where you are, what kind of tape you have. It might start coming up on the edge. We don't have to worry about it here because you've got a couple of layers underneath there protecting it. It dries pretty quickly. Remember to shake your can every time you're going to add a little bit more. And there you have it. You let it dry for a little while, then you can remove all your masking tape. Now, I don't like to let it get too dry. In other words, I wouldn't let it sit overnight because you're going to be peeling this away, and there's obviously spray on the paper, spray on the leather. You don't want it to all stick, get all dry, and then you wind up peeling it away when you go to take off the stencil itself. Peel it back very gently. Take your time, especially right here. And what you may have to also do is, like on that little A, the masking paper, the part of the stencil is still on there. That's why you're not seeing the black in the A right now. We'll deal with that in a second. And there you have it. The way to get those little parts in that A off, you can do it with a pair of tweezers or something that's not too pointed. You don't want to poke a hole in the leather. So I want to let this dry a little bit more before I start picking away at those little spots on the A's. But right now, as you can see, looks like factory finish on there. And if by any chance the white should bleed into any of the grain of the leather, and it hasn't on this one, but I've had it where it has before, you could take a Sharpie, fine point Sharpie, and you could just go right next to it. When it dries, you'll never be able to tell the difference. And that's my tip on how to put a stencil on a seat. So next time, try that. Unless the owner maybe wants to come over and tell me what he thinks of the job.
Like you said, Joey, factory.
Yeah, Brad called me up on Sunday, asked me to come down and help him out with that. I was happy to do that. We did get those little triangle A's out afterward. We just picked them out with a tweezer, just like I had recommended that you do, and the seat turned out perfectly. Jordan, great job on the editing. Thank you, Brad, for the opportunity. Steaks and wine were excellent. It was certainly a good trade for coming down and helping you put that on your seat. What do we got next, Jordan? 1977 Suzuki RM125, possibly the nicest 77 RM125 I've ever seen. This was sent in to us by Terry Knutson from British Columbia, Canada. This bike is absolutely incredible. So many NOS parts, down to the frame and the swing arm. The complete ignition system is NOS. The crank assembly, reed block, intake, exhaust flange, all NOS. He's had the fork tubes and the lower tubes. Those were NOS as well. The chain adjusters and so much more on this bike were all NOS. Terry went from top to bottom on this bike and left no stone unturned. He did mention that he used no lean 15.5-inch shocks on the bike. Those items are from Moto Duro in the UK. And with the exception of that and maybe the silencer, I can't think of anything that Terry touched on this bike that didn't turn out absolutely perfectly. I don't think I'm certain I could not have done a better job. I can't think of anyone else that would have. In fact, Terry mentions to me that I was actually the one that restored the gas tank on this bike. I know I did it with Suzuki tank. I've done many of them, but I don't remember doing a 77 RM125 for quite some time. But I want to thank Terry Knutson for sending in this 77 RM125 Suzuki. Beautiful job, Terry. You've got some stickers coming to you from fastguystuff.com. They are in the mail. Thank you once again, Terry, for sending us in this incredible bike. And here's the problem segment. We take a look at several different things this week. Jordan, what do we got up first? Can you discuss the pros and cons of powder coat and paint? Mark Brown. Yes, I can, and I've discussed it many times, but I don't mind doing it again because not everybody watches the show every week. Pros and cons. Paint for show, powder coat to go. No matter what you do, either way, get the frame sandblasted, whether you're going to paint it or powder coat it, so you can see if there are any cracks, any imperfections, anything that needs to be addressed before you paint it. If you're going to have it powder coated, make sure you tell your powder coater ahead of time that you'd like to see the frame after he sandblasts it. This way you can get down there and make sure yourself that everything is as it should be. Some people will say, well, if you powder coat it and you erase it, if there's chips, you can't repair it. You can repair it. You can touch it up with paint. It's not going to make any difference, any more of a difference or any less of a difference than if you paint it, okay? Another person might say, well, you can't tell where the cracks are. You got to look real close on cracks if you paint a frame really well too. So I don't know if that argument holds up as well as people might think it does. So if you're going to show the bike, paint it, that's the way it's going to be. If you're going to race it, you can powder coat it. One thing I would tell you though, something to keep in mind. If you want to show the bike and you're going to powder coat it too, and that's very, very possible, tell your powder coater you want 80% gloss. 80% gloss will look a lot more like paint than when you do a powder coat job and it's 100% and it's way, way shinier than any factory finish. Mark Brown, thanks for the question. Robert Oscar Pomeroy, Joe, what would you suggest for repairing this lower frame rail? There's a hole, but it's not smashed. When I looked at these pictures, Robert, the first thing that came to my mind was this is not damage that was done on the trail from a rock severing that steel. This is because water got down to that frame from sitting for a while and rusted right through. And what tells me that is that the frame rail is not smashed in at all, but I do see a hole. I would recommend getting the frame sandblasted, at least both rails. If you don't sandblast the whole thing, at least get the rails done on both sides. At that point, a good sandblasting will expose any pinholes that might be in that frame. If that's the case, and you do see pinholes, you're going to have to cut that section out, have a qualified welder replace that whole frame rail. If it's sturdy yet and you haven't lost any integrity in that rail, you could put some weld in there, file it off, sand it off nice and round, and you can then just refinish it in your paint or powder coating, whichever way you want to do it. But the most important thing is to check the structure, the integrity of that tube before you go any further. In this picture right here, under the shift, you can see where it's worn through right here, the paint. It's not the same bike, but I put this picture up here so you can see approximately where that frame rail may be rusted out, and it's just ahead of the peg. So I would really pay attention to what's going on there, make sure I have a good repair and I've got a really good solid frame before I went and painted it and maybe put the bike into service as a race bike. Robert, thank you so much for the question. Achilles Caracas, I'm restoring an 81 YZ250. The rims are structurally good, but I want to give them a nice finish. What's the best method? Achilles, I spoke to my friend back in New Jersey. His name is George Lucas, GTL Metal Polishing. George tells me that what he does is uses a flap wheel to get the anodizing off of the rim. Now, a flap wheel is what you see in these pictures. There's two of them. The one on the bottom, which has a hole in it, you put on a mandrel and you could use on a buffing machine. The one on top has a mandrel on it as well, but it goes into your drill and you can use that. What George recommends is starting with 80 grit, an 80 grit flap wheel, then going to 180, 240, and then 320. After that, on a polishing machine, or you could do it using your drill as well, you would use a black emery to get off all the sand scratches and anything, little tiny imperfections that might be in there. After the black emery, he follows up with triple E compound. At that point, you should have a rim that looks pretty much as, well, it wouldn't be chrome, but it's a really high polished aluminum. At that point, you could send it to your plater if he does anodizing, and you can have your rims anodized at that point. But the most important thing is, of course, is getting that anodizing off in the first place. And while some people will say that there's a chemical, and there is one, where you could dip your rim in there and it's going to remove the anodizing, I've seen over the years that it doesn't remove it completely. and you're still going to have to sand it, and you might have a little bit of a mess after that. So really the safest and most efficient way to do it is with the flap wheels on a drill or a buffing machine, follow up with the black emery on a sisal wheel, follow up with the red Tripoli on a soft buff, get your rims nice and shiny, you give them to your plater, he reanodizes them, and you're in business. Achilles, thank you for the question. Mike Cravens, how do you repair inner fork tubes that have rusted or pitted? I don't know of a way to do that, except to have them re-chromed. You could replace them. You can call a place like Forking by Frank, or some other people are making replacement forks like this. DC Plastic is one of them. I know they make them for the CR125, CR250, some Suzukis. In fact, they've got a pretty good lineup. I would replace them if I had to. And when I say if I had to, that means they can't be re-chromed, hard chromed. When do they get to that point? When the pitting and rust is really so bad that the person doing the hard chroming and repairing of them can't really deal with it. Pits can get really deep sometimes, but they can be repaired. How are they repaired? All the hard chrome is stripped off. They braze in all the pits. Then that whole fork leg has to be machined down, nice and smooth. Then of course there's layers of copper, layers of zinc, layers of hard chrome. You can, and I've heard it, I've never tried it. If you've got a pit somewhere in the slider area, I've heard that if you really clean off the chrome really good, some people have used epoxy and have filled in a little pit. And then they've sanded it down with some ultrafine sandpaper. Why do they do that? Just to fill in the pit so when the fork travels through and gets down to where the oil is in the lower tube, it doesn't come squirting out past the seal. That might work for a while. But as far as repairing them, there's only one way, and that's to have a professional do it or to replace the tube completely. Craven, thank you for the question. Glenn Bellman, what's the biggest race Hodaka ever won? This is a great question. I thought it was a lot of fun, and I asked a couple of Hodaka guys, including Greg Bastick and, of course, Paul Stannard, who owned strictly Hodaka for so many years. The biggest race that Hodaka ever won was at Daytona with Harry Taylor on board a 100cc bike just like this. He did win the 100cc sportsman class at Daytona in 1968. I would also like to add there were only 2 factory Hodakas ever made, one for Harry Taylor and one for Tommy Croft. Now, the other big Hodaka race that was won was around 2004, 2005 by Greg Bastick. This was at Mid-Ohio during Vintage Motocross days. Greg went out there on a bike called a Wolverine, a very specially made bike. In fact, that was ported and the engine was built and the pipe was built by the man you see on that road race bike right there, Harry Taylor. Greg Bastick went out in the 125 expert class and kicked ass on every Elsinore, Suzuki, and Yamaha that was out there in Mid-Ohio that day. That might not be in the record book, but I'll never forget that day. I was there. Greg Bastick on the Wolverine, but in the record books is Harry Taylor, 1968 at Daytona. Glenn Bellman, thank you so much for the question. That was a lot of fun.
Bill, I saw this OSA on eBay this week, and it sold for over $12,400. I thought it would be some interesting content for the viewers, and I know you have some experience with these bikes. I don't know about this one in particular, but when you saw it, what were some of the first things you noticed or you thought about?
Well, I'm a little bit familiar with the bike. I'm glad we're talking about this one this week. It's a unique machine, obviously, being a Bolger long travel OSA. There were not a lot of them made. You can't be real picky if you're looking for one because they don't come up for sale that often. Yeah. This one got a really strong number, perhaps stronger than it should have been.
Well, with only 150 of them being made, I thought the number was strong, but I thought it was completely justifiable because you're probably not going to see another one in the very near future, regardless of the price. Also, I think there's a little bit of a mystique going on right now with the Bolgers, with Joe Bolger's passing in this past April. A couple of things stood out to me on the bike, and I have to confess, I did show it to Keith Linus as well, who was really the world's foremost authority on OSA, if you ask me. And he said to me, he thought the gas tank was wrong. It's got a Haas tank on it. and that the controls were Magura where they should have been Amel. What else did you see there, Bill?
Well, it has a few anomalies on it. The swing arm is obviously from a Super Pioneer because it has a kickstand welded to about the midpoint on the swing arm on the left side. I would rather see a real Phantom swing arm on the bike. I'd rather see a real Phantom fiberglass gas tank on the bike.
Yep.
And the frame number and engine number maybe are a bit of a mix and match. It's a 190 series engine, which would be a 75 GP1 engine. I think he identified it in the ad as being a 76, which is not correct. That would have a 460 serial number. So I think this bike was put together from different pieces of other OSA motorcycles.
Yeah, but the frame, the Bolger setup is authentic, but I think I agree with you on it being, I think, a GP1 and not a GP3. Also, I had some questions about the pipe. He says it's original. I'm not so sure about that. What did you see?
Well, absolutely not an original OEM pipe, as he said it was. If you look carefully at the exhaust system, you'll see kind of at the midpoint on the vertical cone, out of welding rod, there's a MV, which would be the designation for Mid-Valley OSA Motorcycle Shop, which was a Southern California hop-up shop. They made a lot of pipes for OSA Phantoms. This is one of their pipes that I think was made for a GP2 originally, and it was modified to go on this Bolger bike.
How far away do you think this bike is really from being right, Bill? To me, well, let's put it this way. In the description, which seemed very forthcoming, the guy does say he built it for static display, which is a nice way. Many people say the bike does not run and you'll have to go through the engine. So he did say you will have to go through the engine. To be a complete restoration, it would have to come apart. The hardware would have to be done. What would you say in dollars, cents, and hours? How far away is this bike from being right?
Well, you could spend a lot of money making this bike more correct. The biggest thing for me and the biggest deficiency with this build would be the engine. The bike was put together about 15 years ago. The engine was never touched. There's really no telling what condition it's in. These engines, to build them properly, cost a couple $1,000s to go through them and make sure they're all within factory spec. And so this bike was actually offered to me a couple years ago, and I passed on it, and it was primarily because the investment hadn't been made in the engine, and I didn't want to have to put that extra money into it, and yet I wouldn't want to own it unless the engine was fresh.
Yeah. Do you remember the asking price 2 years ago?
Well, he was asking a little higher than what I offered and what ultimately we would have agreed to, which was $10,000. And
it was the same seller?
was also at the high end.
Okay. But it was from the same seller back then as it is now?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. I did have a question I wasn't sure about. Maybe you know a little bit more. The shocks, are they supposed to be, what does he have on there, Marzaki's?
Well, it looks like he's got a set of box shocks on it, which is okay.
Yeah.
There were different shocks put on the Bolger bikes. Most of the Bolgers were assembled a little differently. There was not really one correct way of doing them. So you'd see conies on them. You'd see other different mid-70s period correct shocks put on them.
Well, while there are a couple of shortcomings on the bike and a few questions that I think any OSA enthusiast would have, I think the price was fair at $12,500. You're not seeing one of those come by every day.
No, you're not. So if you're looking for a Bolger bike, you can't be real picky. You're probably going to have to buy one that's not exactly the way you would want to own it. And that's where you just need to step up and to make it either more correct or turn it into the bike that you think it should be.
Yeah, probably a collector grabbed it knowing that he's not going to see another one, and he's going to go the extra mile to make it a lady.
I would agree, and I would hope that they do take the bike to the next level.
Bill, thanks for dropping in this morning, as always.
You bet.
Thank you, Bill Masho. We continue with the 522 project. This is a bike we've been working on for a while. We're out to replicate a 1974 RC 125 Honda, factory bike that was made famous by, of course, Marty Smith in 1974, winning the inaugural 125cc National. This week, we're going to be talking about the airbox. Jordan, let the tape roll. Let's see what we got. On this week's installment of the 522 project, we're going to be talking about the airbox. This is a special airbox that we had made, custom for this bike. It's of course been recessed here so we can use an up pipe with the bike. Side cover comes off on the side, gives us easy access to get to the filter when it comes time for maintenance. The great thing about this box is how much it weighs. It's only a feathery 18 ounces, a whole lot less than the stock box, which weighs in at around 8 pounds. Made of steel, has a door on the side, has a snorkel on top. It weighs a whole lot more than this little airbox right here. I'm going to show you how it fits in right now. Real easily, slips right into the side of the frame like this. It's held in by one bolt here at the top, and the remainder of it will be secured by the side panels and the inner fender. We've also got this little accordion air boot, which will fit to the front, and that's going to fit perfectly on our key and carburetors. That's it for the installment this week on the 522 project. Airbox is looking sweet. Thanks, Jordan. Great job on the editing. And yes, we do have that airbox. It's right here. It is ultra thin, but there are two things I want to correct that I said in that video. Number one, a stock airbox does not weigh 8 pounds. Probably weighs around 5 pounds altogether with the filter inside, with that filter screen inside and everything else. But our fiberglass box weighs 2 pounds. The stock one weighs 8 pounds. And also, I did mention that it was custom made for us. It wasn't. I bought these from Masafumi Haraguchi in Japan. You may know him from Facebook. He was making these for a while. I don't know if he makes them anymore. So it wasn't custom made. He was making them. I purchased them quickly when he had them available. So I just wanted to make those two corrections. Again, Jordan, thanks for putting that together for us. What do we got next? Trivia. Today you're going to win, or get a chance to win, the book Finding Number 49, put together by Keith Geisner. This book recently won an award. It won an award recently. I'm not sure the category it won it in, but the first one to call in with the correct answer will win this book. The question is, he was a national champion several times. He raced with the number 1 plate, but that plate was never on the bike he won the championship on from the previous year. Who is he? I'll say it again, maybe a little clearer. There's a guy that won several national championships. He'd win it on one bike, get the number 1 plate, move it to another bike. He'd win another championship there, but wouldn't ride that bike again. He went to another one. It happened 3 times. Who's the rider I'm talking about? Call in 925-234-8181. 925-234-8181. Live audience only, so if you're watching this on a recording, please don't call in. Who was the guy? Susie's standing by. She'll get us the answer. Somebody's going to win the book, Finding Number 49, by Keith Geisner. In the product spotlight, Preston Petty Products once again has come up with another special for us this week. We are an authorized dealer for Preston Petty. I want to thank Paul and Patty Standard for that. You can visit the Preston Petty website at your leisure. They have all the wonderful products that we all remember from the 70s, from the rear fenders to the number plates to all that great stuff that Preston Petty was producing back then. We're still making it today. 10% off on a front fender in white only. MX front fender in white, 10% off from Preston Petty this week. Inbox me, I'll get you the code. You'll be able to put the code in when you go to checkout, get 10% off a white Preston Petty MX front fender, only available from Preston Petty. Take a look at what Vinco has going on this week.
Classic and vintage dirt bikes are more than a hobby. It's not just about the ride. It's about the work that goes in. The work that keeps you connected to the ride. It's about bringing the bike back to life and doing it with your own hands. It's about the adrenaline and adventure. And when it comes to putting all the pieces together, Only Vinco knows the bikes and parts the way you do. Vinco, keep the ride going.
Vinco, keep the ride going. On the phone, I have the winner of the trivia contest. This is Joe Abate. You're live on the air at Vintage Motocross Q&A. Who am I speaking to?
This is Mark Baird.
Mark Baird. Who was the guy who won several national championships but never took the #1 plate on to the next manufacturer with him?
That was the great Gary Jones.
Gary Jones is the correct answer, Mark. Do you remember what bikes he rode to those 3 championships?
Yamaha, Can-Am, and Honda.
That's it. Yamaha, Can-Am, and Honda. Mark Baird, thank you so much for calling in. We will get you a copy of that book, Finding Number 49. Susie's going to get back on the phone with you right now, and we're going to get your address.
Thank you.
Mark Baird calling in with the right answer. There's another answer. Well, it's not an answer to that question, but something similar. It happened to Jimmy Weiner in 1975. He won the national championship for Yamaha, and then he went and took his #1 plate and took it over to Kawasaki. But the correct answer was Gary Jones. Way to go, Mark Baird. What's up next, Jordan? Oh, just how I see it. A couple of weeks ago, we were here, and I had a just how I see it question. And the question was, what stops most young riders, first-time riders, from getting involved in off-road riding? I also put the same question on the Vintage Motocross Q&A page the next day. It got like 150 to 200 responses. There were 3 responses, mostly to what causes people not to want to get kids to go riding. In third place, although we have it as #1 here, the cost of new bikes. Bikes cost more, yes. People make more money. Things have progressed a lot through the years. Now, I'm not saying that today, where a 125 might be, $6,000 or $7,000, that back in 1974, when it was $1,000, that's a great comparison. But there's still cheap bikes out there for a kid who wants to go out and ride for the first time. So you don't have to go out there and get him a Yamaha or a Honda at $6,000 or $7,000 as his first bike. KTM makes a great lineup of bikes from 50cc all the way up. And there are some things that are in that lineup, as well as some nice little trail bikes that are available from Honda. So I'm not so sure about the cost of bikes keeping people away. Next one was bring back 2-strokes, easier to maintain. Cry me a river. I've been hearing about bringing back 2-strokes, well, ever since they brought on 4-strokes. Yes, they're easier to maintain, but I don't think that's what's really keeping people away from riding. Besides, there are 2-strokes available as well. There's still 2-strokes out there if you really wanted to go get one. And there are a lot of used bikes out there just as well you can go buy just as easily or just as quickly as you can go buy a new one. So while that's kind of a thing, and it's always a hot topic, 2-strokes and 4-strokes, I'm not sure that's the reason why first-time riders are staying away from the trail. #1 was land. A lot of lands have closed, a lot of tracks have closed. There's not a lot of places for kids to ride anymore. So what happens is when a kid is interested in getting a dirt bike for the first time, mom or dad's got to load up that bike and travel maybe an hour and a half, who knows how long, to get the kid out on the trail. And this was really probably the most popular comment of all of them. So many people don't want to load up their bike. And yes, older guys or guys in their 20s or 30s have a pickup truck. They don't mind throwing a bike in back of the truck and driving an hour and a half. But maybe for a mom or a dad who isn't necessarily interested in riding, to get the kid in the car, then drive an hour and a half each way to get him to ride has really put a damper on a lot of first-time riders. So 2 things I'd like to mention right here as well. About a month ago, I had Scott Harden on my show, on my radio show, Vintage Motocross Radio. Last week, I had Chris Carter on. Both of them mentioned some things about land closing, where to ride, how to get young people involved. If you get a minute, listen to the Scott Harden interview, listen to the Chris Carter interview. But the #1 reason why most people feel that bikes are not selling, or not bikes are not selling, but why we're not getting first-time riders in there is because they have to travel so far to go ride the bike. And that's just how I saw it, and that's just how some other people saw it too. Announcements. First up tonight, Jordan, what do we have? Vintage Motocross Radio. As I just told you about the Scott Harden and the Chris Carter interview. We've got over 15 interviews there now. This week, my guest was Chris Carter. Let's take a listen to some of the sound bites from Chris.
Back then, you could just walk through the pits. Joe Robert and Coster, just the two of them here, guys are world champions. They're driving around in a used Ford Econoline van, and they'd have their CZs in the back, and they'd show up from race to race. They started in Pepperell, Massachusetts. They flew into, I guess, New York, had that van there, and I think it was Ghost Motorcycles supplied the bikes for them.
Yeah.
And then they had special parts for them, and their mechanics, I think, somehow they have their mechanics too. But anyway, those two guys would travel around from race to race. And when I went to the very first one of those races, it was at an old golf course in Santa Cruz. It was a really cool place. And they had their in around there. We were just blown away at watching these guys and watching Robert and DeCosta. It was just an Adolf Wheel, and I think Hallman was there too. There was probably a dozen of them that were traveling then. And it was just mind blowing. And I know a lot of this show, a lot of your audiences are into collecting stuff. Well, that's where I kind of got the bug to start collecting stuff back then.
That early on?
Yeah,
Wow.
because I after the race, I went over and Robert's pits, and I was really nervous and everything. And I asked if I could have his jersey, and he said, "No. I only have two. For all these races." Now, this is world champion. And he'd already been maybe they'd already raced, in the United States 5 or 6 times, and they had 2 or 3 more races. He said, maybe the next race. I go to the next race. He said, no, I still need the jersey. So I went on and went to the last race, and he gave me his jersey after the race. And I still have that jersey. I think maybe you've seen it.
I have.
But I got it framed, and so that was my first collectible in 1968, I guess it was.
Great interview with Chris Carter last week. If you get a chance, go and listen to it. My guest this Sunday, I am really honored to have this person on my show. It's Mary McGee. If you're not familiar with Mary McGee, go to Wikipedia and be prepared to read a lengthy description of who Mary McGee is. She has finished the Baja 500 by herself on a Triumph. She raced the Baja 1000. She's raced Ferraris, Corvettes, and Jaguars. She had a road racing license, a motocross license. She is just one incredible lady. She's in the AMA Hall of Fame, the Trailblazers Hall of Fame. We're going to be talking to Mary for at least an hour this Sunday at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time on Vintage Motocross Radio. I hope you could join us. Full Circle Racing. I told you a little bit about this at the beginning of the show. Full Circle Racing, Tom McAllister up in the Great Northwest does a great job of rebuilding rims. He's got spokes, rims. He's really, really a craftsman at what he does. Now, why I went to Tom McAllister was because I'm interested in helping the mom and pop shops. Yes, I could have gone to W. I could have gone to Buchanan. I've dealt with Buchanan for years. But I want to give a guy like Tom McAllister a shot at Full Circle Racing. We came to an agreement on something that fit his budget, and you'll be seeing a lot more from Tom McAllister and Full Circle Racing here at Vintage Motocross Q&A. We also have Mark Hildebrand coming on board with Nightmare Racing. We're going to be doing a little redecorating on the background up here so we could get all the signage up and get everybody in the spotlight here on the show every week. I'm working on one more sponsor. We've been going back and forth. It's going to be a big one. After that one, I don't think we're going to have any more room on the show. So if you're still interested in becoming involved and being a sponsor on Vintage Motocross Q&A, you got to get a hold of me. I want to thank Tom McAllister and Mark Hildebrand for jumping on board with us in the past couple of weeks. T-shirts are still available. $21.99. Nice white T-shirt with the Vintage Motocross Q&A logo on the front. And of course, on the back, live at Facebook with my name and now on YouTube. So there's a link to this on the show, on the video. After it's over, you can go check out the link in the show description. $21.99. This is Jordan's gig. Go out there, buy some shirts, send in a picture of yourself wearing the shirt. We'd love to see it. FastGuyStuff.com supplying us with stickers every week for bikes that are in the Moto Showcase. I want to thank Sean Gomes and FastGuyStuff.com for their continued support. Sponsorship opportunities, as I just mentioned. We've got some new ones coming on board. We're kind of running out of real estate here. We've only got, Well, look, let's put it this way. If you're interested in still becoming a sponsor, get a hold of me. But I would imagine in the next week or so, you're not going to be seeing that in the announcements anymore. We're going to have our fill of sponsors on the show until something bigger comes along. So get a hold of me if you'd like to know more about a sponsorship opportunity. Inbox me, and we'll put something together for you. That's it for tonight's show. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, I want to thank Jordan, Chelsea, Susie, everybody that helps put the show together. If you have any questions, you can always inbox me at any time. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. You're watching Vintage Motocross Q&A. I'm Joe Abadi. Have a good night. Gina! Ooh, you were right on time tonight, Gina. Right on time. Good boy. I was going to replace you with a cat if you didn't get it.